of the various kinds of princedom, and of the ways in which they are acquired. All the states and governments by which men are or ever have been ruled, have been and are either republics or princedoms. Princedoms are either hereditary, in which the sovereignty is derived through an ancient line of ancestors, or they are new. New princedoms are either wholly new, as that of Milan to Francesco Sforza, or they are like limbs joined on to the hereditary possessions of the prince who acquires them, as the kingdom of Naples to the dominions of the king of Spain. The states thus acquired have either been used to live under a prince or have been free, and he who acquires them does so either by his own arms or by the arms of others, and either by good fortune or by merit. 2. The hereditary princedoms of republics I shall not now speak, having elsewhere spoken of them at length. Here I shall treat exclusively of princedoms, and, filling in the outline above traced out, shall proceed to examine how such states are to be governed and maintained. I say, then, that hereditary states, accustomed to the family of their prince, are maintained with far less difficulty than new states, since all that is required is that the prince shall not depart from the usages of his ancestors, trusting for the rest to deal with events as they arise. So that if an hereditary prince be of average address, he will always maintain himself in his princedom, unless deprived of it by some extraordinary and irresistible force, and even if so deprived will recover it, should any, even the least, mishap overtake the usurper. We have in Italy an example of this in the Duke of Ferrara, who never could have withstood the attacks of the Venetians in 1484, nor those of Pope Julius in 1510, had not his authority in that state been consolidated by time. For since a prince by birth has fewer occasions and less need to give offense, he ought to be better loved, and will naturally be popular with his subjects, unless outrageous vices make him odious. Moreover, the very antiquity and continuance of his rule will efface the memories and causes which lead to innovation. For one change always leaves a dovetail into which another will fit. 3. Of mixed princedoms, but in new princedoms difficulties abound. And, first, if the princedom be not wholly new, but joined on to the ancient dominions of the prince, so as to form with them what may be termed a mixed princedom, changes will come from a cause common to all new states, namely, that men, thinking to better their condition, are always ready to change masters, and in this expectation will take up arms against any ruler, wherein they deceive themselves, and find afterwards by experience that they are worse off than before. This again results naturally and necessarily from the circumstance that the prince cannot avoid giving offense to his new subjects, either in respect of the troops he quarters on them, or of some other of the numberless vexations attendant on a new acquisition. And in this way you may find that you have enemies in all those whom you have injured in seizing the princedom, yet cannot keep the friendship of those who helped you to gain it, since you can neither reward them as they expect, nor yet, being under obligations to them, use violent remedies against them. For however strong you may be in respect of your army, it is essential that in entering a new province, you should have the good will of its inhabitants. Hence it happened that Louis XII of France, speedily gaining possession of Milan, as speedily lost it, and that on the occasion of his first capture, Lodovico Sforza was able with his own forces, only to take it from him. For the very people who had opened the gates to the French king, when they found themselves deceived in their expectations and hopes of future benefits, could not put up with the insolence of their new ruler. True it is that when a state rebels and is again got under, it will not afterwards be lost so easily. For the prince, using the rebellion as a pretext, will not scruple to secure himself by punishing the guilty, bringing the suspected to trial, and otherwise strengthening his position in the points where it was weak. So that if to recover Milan from the French it was enough on the first occasion that a Duke Lodovico should raise alarms on the frontiers, to wrest it from them a second time, the whole world had to be ranged against them, and their armies destroyed and driven out of Italy. And this for the reasons above assigned. And yet, for a second time, Milan was lost to the king. The general causes of his first loss have been shown. It remains to note the causes of the second, and to point out the remedies which the French king had, or which might have been used by another in like circumstances to maintain his conquest more successfully than he did. I say, then, that those states which upon their acquisition, are joined on to the ancient dominions of the prince who acquires them, are either of the same province and tongue as the people of these dominions, or they are not. When they are, there is a great ease in retaining them, especially when they have not been accustomed to live in freedom. To hold them securely it is enough to have rooted out the line of the reigning prince, because if in other respects the old condition of things be continued, and there be no discordance in their customs, men live peaceably with one another, as we see to have been the case in Brittany, Burgundy, Gascony, and Normandy, which have so long been united to France. For although there be some slight difference in their languages, their customs are similar, and they can easily get on together. He, therefore, who acquires such a state, if he mean to keep it, must see to two things. First, that the blood of the ancient line of princes be destroyed. Second, that no change be made in respect of laws or taxes. For in this way the newly acquired state speedily becomes incorporated with the hereditary. But when states are acquired in a country differing in language, usages, and laws, difficulties multiply, and great good fortune, as well as address, is needed to overcome them. One of the best and most efficacious methods for dealing with such a state is for the prince who acquires it to go and dwell there in person, since this will tend to make his tenure more secure and lasting. This course has been followed by the Turk with regard to Greece, who, had he not, in addition to all his other precautions for securing that province, himself come to live in it, could never have kept his hold of it. For when you are on the spot, disorders are detected in their beginnings, and remedies can be readily applied, but when you are at a distance, they are not heard of until they have gathered strength, and the case is past cure. Moreover, the province in which you take up your abode is not pillaged by your officers. The people are pleased to have a ready recourse to their prince, and have all the more reason if they are well disposed, to love, if disaffected, to fear him. A foreign enemy desiring to attack the state would be cautious how he did so. In short, where the prince resides in person, it will be extremely difficult to oust him. Another excellent expedient is to send colonies into one or two places, so that these may become, as it were, the keys of the province, for you must either do this, or else keep up a numerous force of men-at-arms and foot soldiers. A prince need not spend much on colonies. He can send them out, and support them at little, or no charge to himself, and the only persons to whom he gives offense are those whom he deprives of their fields, and houses to bestow them on the new inhabitants. Those who are thus injured form but a small part of the community, and remaining scattered and poor can never become dangerous. All others being left unmolested, are in consequence easily quieted, and at the same time are afraid to make a false move, lest they share the fate of those who have been deprived of their possessions. In few words, these colonies cost less than soldiers, are more faithful, and give less offense, while those who are offended, being, as I have said, poor and dispersed, cannot hurt. And let it here be noted that men are either to be kindly treated, or utterly crushed, since they can revenge lighter injuries, but not graver. Wherefore the injury we do to a man should be of a sort to leave no fear of reprisals. But if instead of colonies you send troops, the cost is vastly greater, and the whole revenues of the country are spent in guarding it, so that the gain becomes a loss, and much deeper offense is given. Since in shifting the quarters of your soldiers from place to place the whole country suffers hardship, which as all feel, all are made enemies, and enemies who remaining, although vanquished, in their own homes, have power to hurt. In every way, therefore, this mode of defense is as disadvantageous as that by colonizing is useful. The prince who establishes himself in a province whose laws and language differ from those of his own people, ought also to make himself the head and protector of his feebler neighbors, and endeavor to weaken the stronger. And must see that by no accident shall any other stranger as powerful as himself find an entrance there. For it will always happen that some such person will be called in by those of the province who are discontented either through ambition or fear, as we see of old the Romans brought into Greece by the Aetolians, and in every other country that they entered, invited there by its inhabitants. And the usual course of things is that so soon as a formidable stranger enters a province, all the weaker powers side with him, moved thereto by the ill will they bear towards him, who has hitherto kept them in subjection. So that in respect of these lesser powers, no trouble is needed to gain them over, for at once, together, and of their own accord, they throw in their lot with the government of the stranger. The new prince, therefore, has only to see that they do not increase too much in strength, and with his own forces, aided by their good will, can easily subdue any who are powerful, so as to remain supreme in the province. He who does not manage this matter well, will soon lose whatever he has gained, and while he retains it will find in it endless troubles and annoyances. In dealing with the countries of which they took possession, the Romans diligently followed the methods I have described. They planted colonies, conciliated weaker powers without adding to their strength, humbled the great, and never suffered a formidable stranger to acquire influence. A single example will suffice to show this. In Greece the Romans took the Achaeans and Aetolians into their pay, the Macedonian monarchy was humbled, and Antiochus was driven out. But the services of the Achaeans and Aetolians never obtained for them any addition to their power. No persuasions on the part of Philip could induce the Romans to be his friends on the condition of sparing him humiliation. Nor could all the power of Antiochus bring them to consent to his exercising any authority within that province. And in thus acting the Romans did as all wise rulers should, who have to consider not only present difficulties but also future, against which they must use all diligence to provide. For these, if they be foreseen well yet remote, admit of easy remedy, but if their approach be awaited, already past cure, the disorder having become hopeless, realizing what the physicians tell us of hectic fever, that in its beginning it is easy to cure, but hard to recognize, whereas, after a time, not having been detected and treated at the first, it becomes easy to recognize but impossible to cure. And so it is with state affairs. For the distempers of a state being discovered while yet inchoate, which can only be done by a sagacious ruler, may easily be dealt with, but when, from not being observed, they are suffered to grow until they are obvious to everyone, there is no longer any remedy. The Romans, therefore, foreseeing evils while they were yet far off, always provided against them, and never suffered them to take their course for the sake of avoiding war. Since they knew that war is not so to be avoided, but is only postponed to the advantage of the other side. They chose, therefore, to make war with Philip and Antiochus in Greece, that they might not have to make it with them in Italy, although for a while they might have escaped both. This they did not desire, nor did the maxim leave it to time, which the wise men of our own day have always on their lips, ever recommend itself to them. What they looked to enjoy were the fruits of their own valor and foresight. For time, driving all things before it, may bring with it evil as well as good. But let us now go back to France, and examine whether she has followed any of those methods, of which I have made mention. I shall speak of Louis and not of Charles, because from the former having held longer possession of Italy, his manner of acting is more plainly seen. You will find, then, that he has done the direct opposite of what he should have done in order to retain a foreign state. King Louis was brought into Italy by the ambition of the Venetians, who hoped by his coming to gain for themselves a half of the state of Lombardy. I will not blame this coming, nor the part taken by the king, because, desiring to gain a footing in Italy, where he had no friends, but on the contrary, owing to the conduct of Charles, every door was shut against him, he was driven to accept such friendships as he could get. And his designs might easily have succeeded had he not made mistakes in other particulars of conduct. By the recovery of Lombardy, Louis at once regained the credit which Charles had lost. Genoa made submission, the Florentines came to terms, the Marquis of Mantua, the Duke of Ferrara, the Bentivogli, the Countess of Forli, the Lords of Faenza, Pesaro, Rimini, Camerino, and Piombino, the citizens of Lucca, Pisa, and Siena, all came forward offering their friendship. The Venetians, who to obtain possession of a couple of towns in Lombardy, had made the French king master of 2/3 of Italy, had now cause to repent the rash game they had played. Let anyone, therefore, consider how easily King Louis might have maintained his authority in Italy, had he observed the rules which I have noted above, and secured and protected all those friends of his, who being weak and fearful, some of the church, some of the Venetians, were of necessity obliged to attach themselves to him, and with whose assistance, for they were many, he might readily have made himself safe against any other powerful state. But no sooner was he in Milan than he took a contrary course, in helping Pope Alexander to occupy Romagna, not perceiving that in seconding this enterprise, he weakened himself by alienating friends and those who had thrown themselves into his arms, while he strengthened the church by adding great temporal power to the spiritual power which of itself confers so mighty an authority. Making this first mistake, he was forced to follow it up, until at last, in order to curb the ambition of Pope Alexander, and prevent him becoming master of Tuscany, he was obliged to come himself into Italy. And as though it were not enough for him to have aggrandized the church and stripped himself of friends, he must needs in his desire to possess the kingdom of Naples, divide it with the king of Spain, thus bringing into Italy, where before he had been supreme, a rival to whom the ambitious and discontented in that province might have recourse. And whereas he might have left in Naples a king willing to hold as his tributary, he displaced him to make way for another strong enough to effect his expulsion. The wish to acquire is no doubt a natural and common sentiment, and when men attempt things within their power, they will always be praised rather than blamed. But when they persist in attempts that are beyond their power, mishaps and blame ensue. If France, therefore, with her own forces could have attacked Naples, she should have done so. If she could not, she ought not to have divided it. And if her partition of Lombardy with the Venetians may be excused as the means whereby a footing was gained in Italy, this other partition is to be condemned as not justified by the like necessity. Louis, then, had made these 5 blunders. He had destroyed weaker states, he had strengthened a prince already strong, he had brought into the country a very powerful stranger, he had not come to reside, and he had not sent colonies. And yet all these blunders might not have proved disastrous to him while he lived, had he not added to them a 6th in depriving the Venetians of their dominions. For had he neither aggrandized the church, nor brought Spain into Italy, it might have been at once reasonable and necessary to humble the Venetians. But after committing himself to these other courses, he should never have consented to the ruin of Venice. For while the Venetians were powerful, they would always have kept others back from an attempt on Lombardy, as well, because they never would have agreed to that enterprise on any terms save of themselves being made its masters. As because others would never have desired to take it from France in order to hand it over to them, nor would ever have ventured to defy both. And if it be said, the King Louis ceded Romagna to Alexander, and Naples to Spain, in order to avoid war, I answer that for the reasons already given, you ought never to suffer your designs to be crossed, in order to avoid war, since war is not so to be avoided, but is only deferred to your disadvantage. And if others should allege the king's promise to the Pope, to undertake that enterprise on his behalf, in return for the dissolution of his marriage, and for the cardinal's hat conferred on d'Amboise, I answer by referring to what I say further on concerning the faith of princes, and how it is to be kept. King Louis, therefore, lost Lombardy from not following any one of the methods pursued by others who have taken provinces with the resolve to keep them. Nor is this anything strange, but only what might reasonably and naturally be looked for. And on this very subject I spoke to d'Amboise of Nantes, at the time when Duke Valentino, as Cesar Borgia, son to Pope Alexander, was vulgarly called, was occupying Romagna. For, on the cardinal saying to me that the Italians did not understand war, I answered that the French did not understand statecraft, for had they done so, they never would have allowed the church to grow so powerful. And the event shows that the aggrandizement of the church and of Spain in Italy has been brought about by France, and that the ruin of France has been wrought by them. Whence we may draw the general axiom, which never or rarely errs, that he who is the cause of another's greatness is himself undone, since he must work either by address or force, each of which excites distrust in the person raised to power. IV. Why the kingdom of Darius, conquered by Alexander, did not, on Alexander's death, rebel against his successors Alexander the Great, having achieved the conquest of Asia in a few years, and dying before he had well entered on possession, it might have been expected, having regard to the difficulty of preserving newly acquired states, that on his death the whole country would rise in revolt. Nevertheless, his successors were able to keep their hold, and found in doing so no other difficulty than arose from their own ambition and mutual jealousies. If anyone think this strange and ask the cause, I answer, that all the princedoms of which we have record, have been governed in one or other of two ways, either by a sole prince, all others being his servants permitted by his grace and favor to assist in governing the kingdom as his ministers, or else, by a prince with his barons who hold their rank, not by the favor of a superior lord, but by antiquity of blood, and who have states and subjects of their own who recognize them as their rulers, and entertain for them a natural affection. States governed by a sole prince and by his servants vest in him a more complete authority, because throughout the land none but he is recognized as sovereign, and if obedience be yielded to any others, it is yielded as to his ministers and officers, for whom personally no special love is felt. Of these two forms of government we have examples in our own days in the Turk and the King of France. The whole Turkish Empire is governed by a sole prince, all others being his slaves. Dividing his kingdom into sanjaks, he sends thither different governors whom he shifts and changes at his pleasure. The King of France, on the other hand, is surrounded by a multitude of nobles of ancient descent, each acknowledged and loved by subjects of his own, and each asserting a precedence in rank of which the king can deprive him only at his peril. He, therefore, who considers the different character of these two states, will perceive that it would be difficult to gain possession of that of the Turk, but that once won it might be easily held. The obstacles to its conquest are that the invader cannot be called in by a native nobility, nor expect his enterprise to be aided by the defection of those whom the sovereign has around him. And this for the various reasons already given, namely, that all being slaves and under obligations they are not easily corrupted, or if corrupted can render little assistance, being unable, as I have already explained, to carry the people with them. Whoever, therefore, attacks the Turk must reckon on finding a united people, and must trust rather to his own strength than to divisions on the other side. But were his adversary once overcome, and defeated in the field, so that he could not repair his armies, no cause for anxiety would remain, except in the family of the prince, which being extirpated, there would be none else to fear, for since all beside are without credit with the people, the invader, as before his victory he had nothing to hope from them, so after it has nothing to dread. But the contrary is the case in kingdoms governed like that of France, into which, because men who are discontented and desirous of change are always to be found, you may readily procure an entrance by gaining over some baron of the realm. Such persons, for the reasons already given, are able to open the way to you for the invasion of their country, and to render its conquest easy. But afterwards the effort to hold your ground involves you in endless difficulties, as well in respect of those who have helped you, as of those whom you have overthrown. Nor will it be enough to have destroyed the family of the prince, since all those other lords remain to put themselves at the head of new movements, whom being unable either to content or to destroy, you lose the state whenever occasion serves them. Now, if you examine the nature of the government of Darius, you will find that it resembled that of the Turk, and, consequently, that it was necessary for Alexander, first of all, to defeat him utterly and strip him of his dominions, after which defeat, Darius having died, the country, for the causes above explained, was permanently secured to Alexander. And had his successors continued united they might have enjoyed it undisturbed, since there arose no disorders in that kingdom save those of their own creating. But kingdoms ordered like that of France cannot be retained with the same ease. Hence the repeated risings of Spain, Gaul, and Greece against the Romans, resulting from the number of small princedoms of which these provinces were made up. For while the memory of these lasted, the Romans could never think their tenure safe. But when that memory was worn out by the authority and long continuance of their rule, they gained a secure hold, and were able afterwards in their contests among themselves, each to carry with him some portion of these provinces, according as each had acquired influence there. For these, on the extinction of the line of their old princes, came to recognize no other lords than the Romans. Bearing all this in mind, no one need wonder at the ease wherewith Alexander was able to lay a firm hold on Asia, nor that Pyrrhus and many others found difficulty in preserving other acquisitions, since this arose, not from the less or greater merit of the conquerors, but from the different character of the states with which they had to deal.